everyone. Welcome to our Daughters of Cain. I'm Jasmine. Nice to have you all here. I'm one of the hosts for the show. Um, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm Astradia Obscura. I'm your other host for Daughters of Cain. I hope everyone's doing good.
Period.
And hi, I'm Taya Kennedy. Thank you for inviting me on tonight. I'm excited for this discussion.
Absolutely.
Taya's our lovely honored guests this evening. And part of this was kind of inspired by a conversation that Taya and I had. And we decided it would be really fun to talk about traditions in the craft and neo-traditions and what, traditions are in the craft, why they're important, what are the significance. Like, we're just going to really get into it. We're going to get into it.
And if you guys have any thoughts about traditions, please make sure you post them in the comment section. So, to get this started, I thought we would do a little bit of looking at Ye Olde Dictionary. Because first, I think it's important for us to define what a tradition is. So, according to Merriam-Webster, a tradition is an inherited, established, or customary pattern of thought, action, or behavior, a belief or story, or body of beliefs or stories relating to the past that are commonly accepted as historical, though not verifiable. The handing down of information, beliefs, and customs by word of mouth or by example from one generation to another without written instruction. Cultural continuity in social attitudes, customs, and institutions. Characteristic manner, method, or style. So essentially, a tradition is when a set of stuff is handed down to a set of people and they continue by handing down the set of stuff, and it proliferates and is done regularly. Taya, why don't you tell us what tradition is for you?
I think I would definitely agree with that definition. One thing I think that definition leaves out is that tradition is not static and unchanging, is that tradition changes typically it changes over time. That in order to stay relevant, to continue to be practiced, it's very often changed and updated. And
yeah, I agree with that completely. Tradition is definitely a very mutable thing. It's something that definitely can change and evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add on that. Go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing I would say is that tradition doesn't necessarily mean ancient. Very often, right, we think something is traditional, right? It must mean that it's from like times of old, and it doesn't have to be. We can have traditions that are more modern, right?
Absolutely. And that's something that I often, I guess we'll say preach to people, is that witchcraft... Preach. Is that witchcraft, and this is something we were just talking about, we as witches are meant to be adaptable. And that means that some stuff, some traditions have to be new, have to be reinvented, because the thing that excuse me, the thing that ye olde witch in the 1800s 1700s was doing aren't things that are going to be necessarily relevant or viable for us currently. Magic is based on location, environment, society, and that is how we have to work our magic. Go ahead, Taya.
I was going to say, because I just had this conversation the other day with we were just having like a coffee meetup, and we got talking about like books of shadows and stuff and grimoires and like keeping your own records. And somebody had said, I feel like I'm not witchy enough because I do it on my computer. And, like traditionally, right, isn't it supposed to be handwritten? And I don't know, like, if I should be doing it on my computer. And I was like, are you kidding me? If the witches from the 1600s or anybody that kept these kind of records from the 1600s saw the kind of technology we have today, they would be like, why are you still handwriting this?
Absolutely. I
all
feel
the
like,
time.
yeah, and I feel like Google is all of our like greatest grimoires right now. Like the interwebs, all the information that's out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's something, definitely magical about handwriting things
Oh
out
yeah.
yourself. But we do have these modern technologies, modern tools that we can use in our witchcraft that just because they didn't use them in the 1600s because they didn't have them. If they would have had them, they would have used them.
I'm just saying, like, I love a mortar and pestle, but I have a spice grinder that I use to grind up my spices. I'll put it in there to like grind the energy into it. But if I'm making like powders or anything like that, they're going in the spice grinder.
Yes. Spice grinders, coffee makers, tea kettles, like, hello.
And I mean,
Crock pots.
my phone holds a lot of the notes that I keep about witchcraft that I will later transfer into a grimoire, but I keep a lot of witchy notes in my phone.
I use my phone as like my dream journal because I've tried to keep a notebook, like pen and paper notebook dream journal, like on my nightstand to like record my dreams, but I would forget about it. Or then I would have to like turn a light on to like write something down and maybe interrupt my partner sleeping, like versus like my phone pulling up the Google Docs app. And I can even talk to text it like while I'm like still half asleep, like stumbling into the kitchen to like grab a water or something. Like it just makes it so much easier, I think.
I was gonna say, in the like hundreds of years in the future, when everything's on a microchip in your hand and you just speak into it and it categorizes and organizes and does it all for you, they're gonna be like, I'm gonna be like the witches of old and type it onto
100%.
right. Whereas we're all
not
like,
to mention, try voice recording a ritual that you do sometime and go back and listen to it. You might hear some freaky stuff.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Never done that.
So now that we've kind of laid the groundwork or the definition of what tradition is, do we want to talk about some various witchcraft traditions that already exist?
I have some in this like doc here in our Google Doc, and I'm just going to like read them off. And these by no means is like all of them. Like I'm sure there's so many more that like I just don't know. But these are just some that like Estradia and I earlier just kind of like quickly came up on a list. So we have like the fairy trad, we have Tubal Cain, 1734, we have the spiral castle trad, we have the Alexandrians, the Gardnerians, Dianic, Gorgarian, OEM, the esoteric order of Dagon, OTO, yours truly, SCC, Black Forest Circle. Yeah, those are just like a few to name. I'm sure there's some more that we could probably put on there, but.
And furthermore, with those traditions that you named, there's a lot of overlap. A lot of those traditions spun off of each other, or there's a lot of overlap based on belief and the traditions that they hold within themselves.
I think of it kind of as like you have like denominations and then you have like the church. And I think like not to say that we're the same per se, but I think of it as like just like Wiccans have like their denomination, but like Dianic Wiccans and Gardnerians are definitely not the same, even though there might be similarities. And I think the same can be said for most magical orders. I mean, like Gardner got a lot from Crowley to begin with. So I think they all kind of feed into each other. And I think that the propagation of these trads, and when I'm talking about trads and traditions, like I'm thinking of like individual groups as opposed to like denominations. And I think that the propagation of these trads is literally what is keeping witchcraft kind of alive in a way. It's not the sole reason, but I think it's like a really big reason. The fact that we have groups that are doing things publicly, not just like in the shadows, but like publicly doing things and inviting and doing community outreach and community service, I think is what's going to continue witchcraft like in the modern era right now. I think we need more of that.
Where do the solitaries come in? Because I would argue there's more people practicing witchcraft solitary and primarily as like eclectic solitaries than there probably are people who are in covens, traditions.
I would agree with that.
I would agree with that too. I think that the solitary witches probably make up significantly more. But I would also say that I think that oftentimes magical orders or groups tend to be doing more directly with community in some form or fashion, whereas solitary witches, if they are doing stuff with community, I would argue to say that eventually that could very easy turn into a neo-trad. Like there's a lot of book clubs that turn into covens. There's a lot of witchy circles or like full moon rituals, right? Where people are like, oh, we're just getting together for the full moon. Like, come on by, bring your friend. They get together each full moon. And before you know it, the same people keep showing up. Before you know it, neo traditions of that group start to form, like, oh, we did this for like the full moon in June last year, so we're going to do this, this year. And then new people start coming in, and then other people start hosting the same rituals they did at so and so's house, and now you have a coven. So I think that the difference there is like, I think solitary witches engage with community on a wider level in like a different way.
Now, Jasmine, you used an interesting term there, and I would like you to give us a little bit more of a definition. What is a neo-tradition?
Iconic. So this is part of like what really inspired this stream, because like Taya and I, we be kikiing sometimes. Like we're legitimately friends, not just for content, but like I can't tell you how many times it's been like almost midnight my time, and I've been like, "What are you doing?"
And I'm like, I'm in bed, but what do you want?
Yeah, and we were talking about it, and I don't remember exactly how we got on the topic of neo-trads, but I like to use that terminology because I think it describes our coven here locally very, very well. Like I think, if you go on our website, and I don't want this to sound like some sort of promotional thing, okay? But I'm just saying, if you go on the website, like it's very clear that our coven was formed in 2017. And there's a lot of people who see just the fact that it was formed in 2017 and they're like, what? Like, this is supposed to be ancient or old. Like, there's a ton of misconceptions. And I think it's important to be upfront about like the newness of it because that's a huge part of it. And I like to use neo-trad, and I also like to use like living trad or like a living tradition because like we have implemented different things over the past 5, 6, 7 years as we've been growing, not only as people, because we started this when we were in our early 20s. Now most of us are in our late 20s, early 30s. So our lifestyle is totally different. Some of our traditions look different than they looked 5 years ago, a year ago. And so to me, a neo-tradition is exactly kind of like what I was just talking about, where you have like a group of people that slowly start to form something, and they might take inspiration from, what other groups and traditions have done. But I think that it's important for a neo tradition to also like implement, entirely new things into it as well. And like we were talking before the stream started, but like, we did the hashtag Witches Black Lent. And I feel like we do this again next year. Does that not inherently make that a tradition? I think so. I don't think it needs to be 60 years old to be a tradition. And I don't even think that I know that the Merriam-Webster, when they were talking about traditions, they used the word generation. And I think some people could take that in terms of like literal generations, like boomers, millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, whatever. But I don't necessarily think that it has to be like literally over the span of that much time to even be considered a tradition. If the three of us decided we were going to go out and get some sangria and smoke some hookah every Friday night, that could become a tradition. I don't even think it has to be inherently religious to be a tradition.
That does sound fun, though.
Just gotta fly Taya down here. Like,
well, because what you said, it wasn't so much that you were a neo tradition, because I get that, right? You're neo, you're new, you're putting it together, and I get it. You're kind of evolving, right? Like you're not, it's not like you do. You keep you're learning and growing, right? But you said, we're a neo traditional witchcraft tradition, and I was like, can you be neo, new, putting it together, and practice traditional witchcraft? Because traditional witchcraft is established and based on folkloric records. So if you're basing it on folkloric records, then you're a traditional craft. And then if you're And neocraft, to me, that was speaking more like we're like eclectic and we're just started new and we're just sort of putting it together and figuring out what we want to do. And I'm like, can you be both? Now, I did go away and think about it. And I was like, that was like my knee-jerk reaction was like, girl, I don't know. And then when I thought about it, I'm like, well, yeah, because you can be new, putting it together based on folklore records. I can do that, right? And I know like a lot, like a bit about like what it is that you do with your coven. You've shared some of your rituals and stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, you do all the components of traditional witchcraft. So I'm like, okay, yeah, you could be. But I'm like, just that knee-jerk reaction was, can you be new and traditional at the same time?
And I am painfully adversarial intentionally. And even like with my friends sometimes, so like I think language is so powerful, and like the words that we choose to use to describe things, I think we can do with a lot of intention. And I know just from my own experience, my local community, the energy I was met with when we first started our group and we started doing things, and now almost all those groups are dead now. And they were traditional. And where did that get them? Where's their group now?
Well, and it's interesting because Dylan on my feed there earlier said, when we were talking about things being traditional, doesn't it also feel like a little toxic purity culture, right? Like old means pure and correct. And it is, right? I think a lot of times people think traditional, especially when it comes to witchcraft, means, yeah, it's traditional. It's what the witches were really doing in the 1600s. And it's like, no, no, that's not what it means, right? It means it's based on folklore and traditions of a culture, of a people, of a group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Also, I want to point out that a lot of the people who are spouting off, that's what the witches in the 1700s were doing, have no idea what those witches were actually doing, because these are the same witches that have their house laden with crystals. And I'm sorry to the crystal girlies, but there was no ancient witch working with crystals. A rock from the river, maybe.
I was going to say, if they found them, like I know I have gone out and I have found clear quartz in a lake near my home, but it doesn't look anything like those cut clear quartzes everybody's getting from the metaphysical store.
Absolutely not. And this all harkens back to what I was saying before about how, and this goes into neo-tradition as well. It is fine to observe tradition. It is important to observe tradition, but we will never be doing the same magic that old Gretel Woodenleg was doing
Gretel Woodenleg
in the 1700s. I don't care if we have her exact grimoire. We are never going to do magic the same way that a witch from a different time period was doing. Because as witches, we have to be adaptable. We have to be able to change, and we are working with the spirits of the land that we are on and the items that we have available to us based on our geography. What that means is that we have to be adaptable enough to use the things within our current timeline, because unless you are jumping timelines, you're not doing anything anywhere else.
I was just going to say, you're reading that work that maybe she's written through the lens of 2023. It's not the same.
It's
as much as
absolutely
you want it
not.
to be, it's not the same. We live in 2023, and our interpretations of her works and her words aren't necessarily going to be exactly the same as somebody who was from that same time period. And the unwritten things in her work that people of that time period maybe would have just understood, that we today are missing that context or that nuance to the working, right?
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of craft elements that we can take inspiration from, like the Picatrix. There's a whole lot of like animal sacrifice and animal aspects within those spells, like using blood from the neck of a wild donkey. Just speaking for myself here, I can't really just run around my city and find a donkey. And if I do, I'm probably also trespassing, for one. So, like, we're breaking the law now. And then, two, like, there's animal cruelty laws, like, I'm probably not going to be able to sacrifice a dog to Hecate in 2023 in a way that's not going to land me in jail. Not saying I want to necessarily either. I'm just saying, like, I think that people who get so hell bent on being historically accurate reconstructionists are really playing an elaborate game of charades, I think, because it's just, you can't really ever fully do that. You can maybe strive to like reconstruct things. But like, I totally agree. I don't think that you're ever going to be able to like even really fully recreate it.
No.
Exactly. And one of the things that really kind of gave me perspective on this was a long time ago, I was doing a study of Northern European magic. So a lot of Norse, a lot of Scandinavian, and everything like that. And one of the things one of the books was talking about is a lot of people in those cultures were doing magic. A lot of people were doing magic, but it was all based on their agriculture, their home life, the things that they needed based on the things that were going on for them at the time. I don't think many of us are out there tilling the land with an ox or planting food to make sure that we can eat for the winter. Most of us have access to grocery stores, thankfully.
Shitting in a hole in the ground.
Well, I mean, Jasmine, I think you might still do that, but
but a lot of us might like to plant gardens and grow our own food, but it is not
Exactly.
the same as when you're doing it out of necessity, as in that is the only food you will have for the next year. Because you're right, we have grocery stores, we have food banks, we have things here that they didn't have.
But there are things that we do need in our current society. A major thing that I think all of us require in our current society is protection. And so maybe a lot of us are doing protection work. Maybe a lot of us are doing prosperity work.
From is different than what they needed protected. We don't need protecting
Absolutely.
from the wolves, the bears in the forest.
Absolutely.
I mean, unless you're hiking in the mountains.
I think travel magic too. Like, I think when it comes to like safe travel talismans and, you know, things of that nature, that's going to look very different too. Like having things for when you go on an airplane is, you know, or like having little charms in your car, like safe travel charms tucked away in like your dashboard and stuff, like tea, you know? Yeah, I want to show this too, because like I think that this is a good example of a lot of what we're talking about, but from the perspective of tattooing. So let me present the screen here. Hold please, hold please. So like this is this is one example. And it's not the best example of an old school tattoo, but like this is one example here. And we see that there's like the old school and new school aspects of tattooing, and they use a lot of the same like color schemes and like color palettes. So like look at this example of a neo-traditional tattoo. And then let me show you this.
This is just reminding me that I need to spend more money on tattoos.
So if you look at the far right here, you have an image of like kind of the profile of a man like looking up, you know, that's very like old school, right? These styles and even some of the colors are very similar. Like they're related, but like new school is distinct in that it tends to use more of like a gradient. And then like old school is like you basically have like a color palette of like 5 colors, but a lot of them are also using similar themes of like, you know, profiles or busts of like men, women, weapons, eagles, hearts, flowers. All of that is very American, even though the color palette might be a little bit different. So to me, it's like, you know, I haven't had many people to my face necessarily be like neo tradition, but I have had plenty of people locally be like, oh yeah, they just make stuff up as they go. Like it's not really witchcraft, which I don't know what we're doing then. If it's not witchcraft, I don't know what you would call it if it's not witchcraft. But it's funny because it's like someone with like an old school tattoo going up to someone with a new school tattoo. And it's the same energy of being like, well, that's not really American style. And it's like, literally it is. It's inspired by. So I think the tattoo example gets my point across in the matter of like, there is taking inspiration from and having similarities too, but there is like distinct differences. And personally, I think that it's more fulfilling to have inspiration from, you know, traditional things, but then also implement completely new things. Like when we did the Witch's Black Lent, that was very fulfilling. That was like a wild experience that we kind of shared. And that's not something in any way historical. like in any way. And so
Yeah.
I think it's good for like specific trads to be implementing like new and vibrant things and kind of mixing it in with things that harken back to, 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Also, something I get real tired of, and again, this might trigger some folk. This narrative, and mostly I see this narrative on TikTok, where someone will share some spell work that they've done, and then from the rafters come the witches that are like, "That's not how you do that spell. That's not correct." Y'all, again, let's talk about old Gretel Wooden Leg. The way that
Old
she
Gretel
was
Wooden Leg.
old Gretel Wooden Leg, the way
We need a
she was doing
graphic for
magic,
her. We need a graphic for her that we
the
can
way
just pull up on the screen.
the way she was doing magic was not how old Hilda Swamp Titties was doing it down in the bog. They were having to probably make up their own spells. Spells can be created and made up. They can be done entirely new. Just because someone says, I'm doing a cleansing and they do it this way, but you do it this way, doesn't mean that either one is wrong. Both can be correct.
This is a conversation I had with my daughter when she was very, very small, and my son too. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong. Things can be different.
They can absolutely be different. Sorry, I'm laughing at the chat.
Oh,
Yeah, the chat's on 10 tonight.
I just keep creating these folkloric witches and I need to quit.
Graphics. We need graphics.
I was just going to say, you need to put some like graphics together so we can put them up on the screen too.
We can just have them dancing like down in the two corners. Yeah.
I'll work on that.
Little gifs.
Oh gosh, Chad, I love you guys. You're awesome.
I also think too, talking about like living tradition, if we look at like other religious groups, you have people that are like very orthodox, right? They're kind of like what I would consider to be like our neo-pagan historical reconstructionists, maybe. Like you have like people that are orthodox, and then you have people that are like progressive. You have like UU groups. So I think that in the craft, especially if we're talking about witchcraft as like a religion and not just witchcraft from like a practice standpoint, I think we have like a lot of that too, where there's people that are like orthodox and then there's people that are progressive. I think that there's like a similar parallel there. I was talking with a coven mate on Saturday. We had a friend over, and I'm hoping to bring this friend onto Daughters of Cain to talk about their experience from growing up in the Baptist church to coming into witchcraft, because I just think that's a fun story to tell. And like, there's often this like evangelical narrative of like, the witch to Christianity and like that whole deliverance testimony. But we were talking about it, and like our other friend like grew up in the Catholic Church, but I guess couldn't be like confirmed as Catholic because their dad wasn't Catholic. So they were baptized as a Lutheran, like all of this mess. So like, I don't know. I think that some of that is probably true. Like when I look at Alexandrians and Gardnerians having discussions, it's just like kind of funny sometimes how much infighting there is just between those two specific groups. And like, who really has the real Wicca? Who has the real magic between the two? And it's like, I just think I think it's fun to watch.
And I'm sorry, I hope I don't butcher your name. Scody Hamilton makes a very good point that chances Greta and Hilda couldn't read either. And that's very true. If you lived if you were living back then and you were not wealthy, the likelihood that you could read was low. So, we also live in an era where, this is another bit that gets on my nerves. So not that anyone necessarily needs to know this about me, but I have ADHD and a plethora of other things on my neurospice rack. I love to read, but I have a lot of trouble doing it because my ADHD causes me to be unable to focus sometimes. So sometimes it takes me longer, or it's more difficult for me to stick with a book for a long period of time, which I'm sure a lot of people find interesting considering that I do quantify myself as a scholar. Um, but witches of old did not have access to scads and scads of books like we had. So they had to make their spells up themselves. We are perfectly capable of creating our own magic, of being creative and doing all of these things that people say we can't do. You do not have to get your spells from someone else's work. In fact, I tend to find that the magic that or the spells that I weave myself without the help of another book are way more powerful. I see Taya agrees.
Oh, absolutely. And like creating spells for yourself, creating your own correspondences, working with your own bioregion because you already therefore intrinsically have a relationship with those herbs and plants rather than ordering them off Amazon in from, I'm in Canada, so ordering them in from South America or Australia or the Far East. I mean, I have no relationship with that, right? Whereas the plants that grow in my backyard, yeah, some people might call them weeds, but they have some really potent magic in them.
Absolutely.
And that's a lot of what those witches of old were doing. And I don't think that there were necessarily any two that used exactly the same herbs in exactly the same way because everybody has their own different relationships with those plants, right?
100%. 100%. I completely agree with that. Also, Jazz, if you'll highlight the last thing that Blood, Sweat, and Steel said. Blood said, am I the only one here who has ever cast a spell to find a parking spot? Interestingly enough, when I was a wee bab, one of the first spells that I was taught to help work with manifestation was find a good parking spot spell. So you are not alone.
I have an awesome book from, I got it way back, like end of the late 90s. And it was all about spells, but it was stuff like, making infusions using a coffee maker, using like we were talking earlier. It was really like spells for modern times using modern tools. It's kind of a gem.
A cauldron or electric cauldron, a crock pot. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Although my archaic ass, I do have down in my room, I have this cast iron tea warmer. It has a little thing in the middle where I can put a candle. And then I have a cast iron bowl. And sometimes if I'm feeling a little extra, like if I want to feel like, if I want to feel that Gretel vibe, I'll sit at my working altar downstairs and I'll put some liquids and herbs in this little bowl and I'll heat them up slowly. And, I'll sit there and stir the little bowl and cackle. Just because it feels good.
Drying herbs in the microwave.
I've never done that. I do dry them. I have dried them in the oven, but I've never tried the microwave before.
I tend to just hang them. I tend to just hang them upside down and then forget about them for 3 months and then be like, oh yeah.
Typically that's what I do, but sometimes you have something and you want to use it in a dried capacity, like ASAP. I tend to have that. I do a lot of sachets and stuff like that, right? Where it's I don't want to put fresh herbs in there because I don't want them to mold.
I'm sure you can probably find a crock pot in the shape of a cauldron somewhere.
I have a new chore.
If someone finds that crock pot, you better send me a link because I need it.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
I need it. I love kitschy, witchy shit. If it looks like something that a cartoon witch would have, I need it. Absolutely.
I think going back to talking about traditions too, there's a lot of witches, especially, and I think I see this more nowadays on the Wild West of TikTok. And it's predominantly I think eclectic Wiccans I see this the most from, where the traditions that they're touting and that they're so proud of, they think that they're literally so much older than they really are. And I don't think that just because something kind of came into being this tradition in the 60s, the 70s, makes it less meaningful or powerful. I think a lot of Doreen Valiente's work is beautiful.
It's like an Aleister Crowley ritual that was taken by Gerald Gardner and rewritten by Doreen Valiente, and it's beautiful and it works. And that's great. It doesn't have to be. But again, right, people think traditional means from times of ancient, means that it's more real, more right, more proper.
And I think that there's like a perceived power that some witches, I think, connect, like authenticity,
Yes,
age, and power, like this sort of like trifecta, that like that's what makes it very real and that's what makes it very meaningful. And like I've been in spaces where, you know, whether it be rituals that our neo-trad has created, or whether it be going to attend another group's ritual where, you know, it was written down literally in a spiral bound notebook maybe a couple days before the actual ritual, and it was created out of the minds of the witches that are putting this together. And recently I got back from the Cleveland Witchcraft, the Raymond Buckland Museum of Witchcraft, which is in Cleveland, Ohio. And one of the things that I love there, that I especially love, like we had taken some, you know, newer initiates with us who hadn't been before. You know, people think of like a Gardnerian Book of Shadows or like a Book of Shadows, and they think of like this big ancient tomb of like, you know, magical texts passed down from witch to witch to witch to witch. But like the OG Gardnerian Book of Shadows was this green spiral bound notebook they have in a glass case. And a lot of these ritual tools literally look like the tools that like we are using now. Like it's not this, but it's interesting to go because like you're looking at these like historical religious relics, and like you think of like the Catholics and a lot of like their relics that they have enshrined, and like the opulence and like the history of it all. And then you go to like the Raymond Buckland Museum of Witchcraft, and like this ancient, highly influential, over the span of like 6 years, Gardnerianism just like exploding, right? And it's a green spiral bound notebook that looks very similar to just like this.
Well, and the thing we have to remember too is a lot of that stuff was from like the 1930s, the 1940s. Well, it's 2023. We're coming up on 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It doesn't have to be like ancient and old. I mean, 100 years is a long time.
Absolutely. And I thought it was like, I remember the first time I went, I don't think they had it there this time, but the first time I went, they had a bunch of like ritual blades from like witches of this coven. And it was just cool to think like, wow, like that was used in a ritual. And it's only like what, maybe 80, 60 years old or whatever, maybe, but like still kind of cool to think about. Or like the circlet that like Doreen wore, like being encased, and like that was on her head when she was doing these rituals.
And didn't you say like it wasn't like super ornate? It was like
No, it was quite
homemade.
crude looking, really. I mean, beautiful. I thought it was beautiful in like that way, but like, yeah, it was very much like just crude metal work, nothing super elaborate.
So something I would like to touch on is, because we kind of said something about it, Taya mentioned it earlier, but I want to talk about tradition from a solitary standpoint, because I am presently a solitary practitioner. And what tradition is to me might look different to Taya and might look different to Jasmine. You know, you guys have asked in the past that I do more videos of my own, talking about witchcraft from my perspective. And part of the reason that I've been hesitant to do that is because while I am a priestess of Hecate, a major aspect of my witchcraft is I am a pop media witch. And what that means is that I derive a great deal of inspiration and magic from modern media, TV shows, books, comic books, especially cartoons. I have done a ritual to summon a familiar based on the ritual from the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And it is easily one of my most successful rituals that I have performed for groups to date. I have created magical rituals based off of Sailor Moon. And frequently I have been told by witches in the community that there's no way that my magic is valid because magic can't come from these things.
Pardon me, but fuck that noise.
Exactly. And that's how I feel. You can take stuff from TV shows, cartoons, comic books, rework it a little bit and turn it into very tangible magic. Because think about it, this is our zeitgeist. This is part of our cartoons and TV shows. These are parts of our mythology. And so I've in the past been hesitant to talk about these things because people can be very dismissive of pop media magic.
Yeah.
But a lot of our modern gods exist within comic books and cartoons and TV shows. So I think it's very viable.
That we don't like as a cultural community, especially here in North America, we don't tend to worship the gods of old, but we idolize like actors and actresses and musicians, and they are a huge part of our collective cultural experience and knowledge and our cultural references, right? You make a Taylor Swift dates lots of boys joke and everybody gets it. Because we've all been around for the last few years where the media has just been all over her for that, right? So there's power in that.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, our world is like the United States, especially because we love the capitalism here. We are saturated in sigils. The golden arches of McDonald's, the siren of Starbucks.
The Bluetooth symbol.
The Bluetooth symbol. We are surrounded by pop cultural magic.
And I think that you just need to do it. Like, I would not let the bullies of the internet keep you from sharing your magic. Because I think that the cool thing about like WitchTube on like witchy YouTube is like people might look back at some of like these witches videos on YouTube in like 20 years, assuming that YouTube is still here. And like, this is kind of like this digital interactive grimoire that we're all like pouring into. And I think that like, it would just be cool to have that connection and that like collaboration and like your own personal sort of mark on this like digital Pokedex of witchy stuff that we have going on. And I think like that's happening with Witch Talk. I mean, I've been on YouTube, I think, since 2015 or 2016. And I go back and cringe at my old videos because I'm like, oh, look at that little girl. She's so cute. She's so cute. But like, yeah, I think it's kind of like a cool historical, like going back and looking, or even like there's some content creators who have passed away and their channels have turned into almost like memorials, like the Tiptoe Witch. Like she was really, really big in the witchcraft community, and her passing, really affected a lot of people because like she was such a figure during like an era, and like her channel has all of that up as almost like archived stuff. So I would say fuck that and that you should do it anyway. But there's this cool question from Blood that I think is really fun that I would like us to talk about. If y'all's 3 tools ended up in a witchcraft museum, what would be the centerpiece of the Taya Jasmine and Astradia collection? This is a fun question. I think I don't know, like I instinctively want to say maybe like my Bacor, because that's something that I use at least weekly. Like, and it's a huge part of like my divination and like cleansing and like blessing, and like it's kind of blending like folk Arabian practice into like European magic. So like I think that would be something. I think a Book of Shadows would definitely be something. I think that would be fun.
Honestly, for me, it would probably be a collection of my makeup. Because makeup is one of the things that I use darn near daily in some capacity. Darn near daily in some capacity. And the application of magic for me, or the application of makeup for me, is very magical. And so it would probably be a selection of my makeup, and probably my grimoire is the best thing I could say, probably.
Your new divination dice, that would be fun.
Oh, I haven't talked about my divination dice. I just got a new set of divination dice from what is the publishing company? from The Publishing Goblin. I haven't gotten to start them yet, but at some point here soon, folks, I'm going to be doing divination dice readings, so be on the lookout for that. But yeah, I'd say a selection of my makeup and my grimoire, or some of my wands. I have a lot of wands. I like wands a lot. What about you, Taya?
What are we going to put in the exhibit?
I don't even know. I'm like, part of me is like my hoods, because I always wear my hoods when I do magic. My stang, probably. That's always like the center. Like if I'm ever doing ritual, that's the center point of my ritual. Maybe my asthma, just because I fucking love it. It's an old sword
That's
that was
awesome.
like cut down and made into it like a dagger length.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and it was like used in like the late 1800s in war. I'm like, there's like a whole story about it. So I think it's really cool. And then I'm like my jewelry. I have a few pieces that like I always wear that are part of my like my ritual do. I don't know.
I think that all sounds awesome.
So much stuff.
We just need to like plug all of this into like an AI generator and like boom.
See
we
what it
have the
looks
museum.
Like. Dylan goes, I knew Taya would say you're staying.
An AI, let's talk about that in terms of like sort of like neo witchcraft traditions and stuff. The Snapchat AI will write you entire spells. If you go on Snapchat and talk to your My AI bot and say, write me a spell honoring, let's say, like the moon goddess, a self-empowerment ritual honoring the moon goddess, the AI bot will write you an entire ritual. And there's even authors now, like on Amazon, that sometimes they're not always very forthcoming about it, which I think that's problematic, in the same way to like pretend that your tradition is thousands and thousands of years old. I think that's problematic. But there's authors out there that are using AI generators to generate entire books. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
I was experimenting with this AI. It's from a group called OpenAI. And I had it create an entire tradition based around working with fairies. And the things that it laid out is, it was pretty on point with some stuff.
What did it lay out?
So do you want me to read a selection of it from
let's have a reading
from my notes? Okay, so one of the things was, where is it? So like, what is fairy? Tools of, no, I don't want to do that one. What is fairy witchcraft? Where is that? Here it is. Okay, what is fairy witchcraft? Fairy witchcraft is a spiritual path that focuses on connecting and working with nature, the fae, and our own inner spirituality. It is a practice that honors the wisdom of the fae and works to create a deep connection to the natural world. Fairy witchcraft focuses on cultivating a relationship with the unseen realms, understanding the energy of the elements, and learning to use this knowledge for healing and spiritual growth. This path involves connecting with the divine feminine, the powers of the moon, and the archetypes of the fae. It is an exploration of inner and outer realms and a way to bring balance to our lives. An AI wrote that.
It's crazy. I think AI is really like the new wave for like so many things. And I think it's going to be touching like very niche aspects of like our human experience, like witchcraft, for an example. But like, I think what AI is going to be doing and being used for is going to drastically change the future. Like, I think this is a really big thing. I know that like there's apps that you can get like as a content creator where you can use AI technology to where you can sit and read from a script, but you can put the video into an app and it will redirect your eyes to be looking at the camera, even if you're just reading from a script. Like, and AI technology does that. There's also entirely like AI personalities where I know that on Canva, you can go and you can create a presenter that will present information like a real person talking, and that looks like a real person, but is completely AI. And you can type out what you want it to say. And it does facial expressions and talks and everything. It's really uncanny valley.
Yeah, some of that stuff's real creepy.
But
Yeah,
I think that
Thursday.
I think this is like bigger than a lot of us think it's going to be. Like, I don't think it's going away anywhere.
No.
I don't think it's going away anywhere. One thing that I will say, I think what it can be good for is if you have an idea for what you want your personal tradition to be, but maybe you're having trouble putting it into words, using an AI to help you cultivate those words is not necessarily a bad idea. I do think that that is one of those things, though, that we need to keep in mind about being open and honest about, because using an AI to create something and then saying it's your own personal work is kind of not cool.
Well, there's also this too that Nicole's saying is that, you know, an AI probably wrote that by taking others' content without permission.
That's
Like,
possible, yeah.
that is happening with some AIs, and like copyright lawyers are struggling to even keep up with it because to some degree it's being seen as original creations, even though it's using hodgepodges of other people's work. Like,
And that's what it does, right? It literally takes other people's work and analyzes it to find the common threads and the common themes and then spits it back out. So yeah.
The Ancient Gardenerian book is indeed an old, not book, Jasmine. I saw it in a documentary, was totally not what we can buy ourselves today. I totally agree. I personally have used the shower cleaning to wash the hex always for any itchy energy that's on and around me, used in the Chilling Adventure of Sabrina. Most AI.
I will say another Sabrina spell that I have used to great success. If you guys remember from episode 1, season 1, she goes to the apple orchard with Harvey, and she's walking around the maze and she's trying to find the apple tree because she wants the Malleus Malum. She's using hickory pickory, hickory pickory, which way will this girl go? She'll go east, she'll go west, she'll go to the crow's nest. Hickory pickory, hickory pickory. I've used this to find stuff that I am looking for. So like if I'm out and about and I feel like I'm lost, I'll say this, and every time I've found where I'm going.
I really like their bastardization of the Hail Mary, where they're like, Hail Lilith, full of disgrace, cursed are you against women, and cursed is the fruit of thy womb. Demons who fled the garden, who would not live in shame. Hail Lilith, blah, 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 blah. Like, iconic.
Yeah.
Pray that over a rosary.
And I know I've mentioned the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina twice now. I have
It's
done
iconic.
work from it really was. Unfortunately, it ended terribly. But
also the whole second season where she literally goes to hell for a man.
Can't relate.
Cannot relate.
But there are a lot of other shows and media out there that you can derive some really potent magic from.
Love Salem on Hulu. Like all that familiar magic where there's like one iconic scene that sticks out in my head where the main character takes her toad familiar and shoves it down the mayor's throat and manipulates his spirit by working with her familiar that's inside of his body. Not saying that I'm doing that quite literally the same way, but like iconic.
Do not mess with Jasmine or she will shove a toad down your throat.
Iconic. And then I also really like, I forget if it's in season 2 or 3, but she goes to go talk to like the High Council or like the Old Council, and they kind of almost look like a variation of like the Mirai. And it's like these 3 haggard women. And like, I think that there is like some folklore surrounding that. But like the way that they depict the High Council is just like, they're in a tree. She has to astral project there or witch fly there. And it's just like chef's kiss. I mean, chef's kiss. We're talking about Sabrina and we're talking about the show Salem, which is really, in a way, kind of unrelated, but related to our wider topic of traditions and witchcraft and neo-tradition.
You create a new tradition, so to speak, right?
And I think another thing for us to touch on in regards to this is like, for one, no one needs to be the witch police and go around policing what witches can and can't do. But I do think that if we're looking within like specific traditions, I do think that there are like inherently right and like wrong like answers. Like a big thing of that I've been, really working with as like a student of the Red Thread Academy is like completely reworking how I work with the directions and like using north for air, because that's just not something that I had done before. And I would say that like
You mean
it would
using north for earth?
north for earth.
No, using north for air.
Yeah, north for air. And
Because
south for earth.
you work with the neo, well, what I would consider the neo directions for the elements, and they work with the traditional directions, which north
I
is
think like the
air.
north being air is hermetic, right?
I don't think so.
Okay, anyway, there's multiple different ways to work with the directions, is the point here.
And
And
if
I
you
do think it
live,
would.
you can actually, like, if you have a big lake south of your property, south can be water, right?
Absolutely.
It's literally about change, like bioregionalism, right? And what do you?
Mhm.
Although, yeah, a lot of, yeah. Go ahead. What you were saying.
I was just saying, I think that within some trads, I do think that there are like specifically, this is the right way to do things. And if you want to be a part of this trad, this specific trad, we're a trad because we're doing things together in a similar fashion. So I think that we go into a dangerous territory when inherently everything is just automatically valid. I think things can be valid for individual practitioners, but I think if we're talking about traditions and even neo traditions, like even if Australia, you let's say start a tradition using AI and like create this fairy craft tradition, incorporating elements of, I don't know, let's say Wonder Woman as like an archetype of the moon goddess, like if people start joining this tradition but then start switching things out, that's not really following that tradition anymore. So I think that that's an important distinction to make when talking about witchcraft practices, because we've been kind of saying like, oh yeah, this is valid and this is valid and that's valid, and like I totally agree, and I don't think anyone has a place to say that's not real witchcraft. But if we're talking about tradition, neo or not, yeah, there is kind of right and wrong ways to do things.
I look at it like a language, right? When you're learning a tradition, that's the language we all speak when we come together. When we're talking about the witch father, that is the spirit that we are specifically referring to, that we will slot into that position. And this is the very specific, maybe goddess that we are working with in the position of the witch mother. And the other thing about traditions is they tend to have some secretive parts that aren't available out to everybody. That's sort of almost how you know who's part of that tradition and who isn't, because the people who are part of it know that knowledge that is only for the people within those traditions. It would be like me going to, like, I don't know, me going to France and then going, oh yeah, see, I'm in France and I'm speaking, so obviously I'm speaking French. No, I'm speaking English. Right?
And
Right.
I think that
right
there's
wrong
like,
there.
yeah, and I think that there's a little bit of nuance even within trads because things do evolve. Like example, just speaking from our own over here, neo trad, like the way that we do initiations is the same layout, but like the person who's leading each initiation for an initiate is theoretically maybe going to be different. And so like that particular initiation might be different, from witch to witch and year to year, but like the overarching themes of how you get initiated into the first degree of our neo-trad would theoretically like be the same. We'd be following like the same blueprint, but like maybe it would look slightly different because a different witch is leading that initiation. And so maybe has like a little something that they add to it. So
But the bones of it, the structure of it.
right, the bones are like the same, yeah.
The same bones.
Same bones.
So,
and I think that's also something with traditions, is traditions are initiatory. Right? For the most part, you have to be initiated into a tradition by others who are already part of that tradition.
Well, where does it start?
Well, it started with the first person who said, I'm going to make this a tradition, right?
Right. And so I think that that's what makes it a living tradition, is that I think it can start with spirit. Like I was never initiated by anyone in SCC.
But you created an SCC tradition, and you decide who you let in to practice that tradition with you.
Well, I would say like collaboratively, the coven but like I'm saying, like I think of it as, because that's something that has been talked about in our local community by like some like older boomer witches, right? Like Jasmine can't really run this coven because no one's initiated her. Their covens are dead and mine is not. So I think that's funny. Also, who initiated Aradia? Right. So I think part of a living tradition is also being like led and guided by the spirits, because I didn't even know a lot of terms in traditional witchcraft, and it was stuff that we had already been doing. Like I didn't know it was called treading the mill, but things that we were doing in ritual were very, very similar to that concept of treading the mill. That's like a very traditional witchcraft thing that you're going to find specifically within that denomination and that practice. And I had no idea that terminology, just like the fetch spirit bit. Like I had never even heard of that before. And I was making video content about ripping your spirit from your body in the shape of an animal. Like, and I had just never heard of it. So I think that being spirit led is a very real thing too. And I think that initiations can also come through like the spirits as well.
I think a tradition can start with a spirit initiation, but can people now be like, oh, but I was initiated by the spirits into SCC?
Right. I agree. No. I agree.
It's like they can start that way, but I don't know that they can continue that way. But I do think as a witch, you can have an initiation by spirit into witchcraft, into being a witch. But I can't go and be like, I am now a Gardnerian Wiccan. The spirits initiated.
I mean, people do. There are people out there who do, which is just like funny to me.
But again, right, they're missing a huge chunk of what happens in that tradition that is kept behind
initiation.
Behind the initiation, yeah.
I like what Abby says here in terms of like, yes, like the devil initiated me. That's, I think, a big thing that a lot of like solitary trad witches have that sort of experience.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple questions. We've got a couple people asking here, what is treading the mill?
Do you want to answer it, T?
I'm like, okay, treading the mill is when you are in your compass round and you typically will have like a fire or a stang or something at the center, and you tread, you walk, or you run, or you dance, or you move in either a clockwise or counterclockwise way, depending on what you're raising energy for. And it raises up energy, and it also creates a bit of a trance-like state. And there's lots of different ways you can do it. Some people do it with what's called a lame step, where you're literally like almost dragging your leg behind you, which is sort of a nod to the witch father. You can typically, what will also happen is you tip your head back into the side like this, and you keep your sight focused on that center fire or stang or whatever, and it lessens the blood flow. A little bit lessens the blood flow, and it helps sort of induce a trance state. So it raises energy and it induces a trance state so that you can then proceed with your workings. Right, Jasmine?
Absolutely. And that second part of that with like cocking the head and, keeping your eye focused on like a central figure. When I was saying that we were treading the mill before I even knew what treading the mill was, that's exactly what we were doing. And that's exactly what, one of the elements that will be coming up at like something that we're doing later. We do it every year. And that's like one of the big key aspects of this ritual. And like, I had no idea that, was even terminology. Like, I think language is so powerful. Related but kind of unrelated too, from like a trans perspective. Like when I was kind of coming out as trans, when I was like literally a child, I didn't have the word transgender. I didn't know that when I was 6 years old. You know what I mean? But I knew that like truth there, and I was expressing that truth, but I might have not had like that terminology. And so I think that when it comes to witchcraft, oftentimes I do think a lot of people can be very spirit led, by the spirits or by the mighty dead, if they're willing to kind of be open to that. But that also means that a lot of it might feel like you're just completely making it up. But that completely making it up comes from the belief that it's being given to you by the spirits.
Yes. And something I just wanted to add for those of you that are like, oh, treading the mill, la la, I want to learn more about that. You can check out The Crooked Path by Keldon.
So good.
Excellent, just really basic introduction. You can read Treading the Mill by Nigel Pearson, which is not all about treading the mill. It is all about traditional witchcraft. So yeah, there's some good resources out there if you can find them.
Jim McGarry as well. Jim McGarry talks about treading the mill a lot.
Yeah.
Though her books anymore are very expensive to get a hold of.
The Devil's Dozen.
Oh, or Roger J. Horn.
Or
Keldon
Robin
and
Artisan.
Roger J. Horn are two very what's the word I'm looking for?
Accessible
works. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're on Amazon. They ship everywhere. They're not overly expensive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nigel Pearson, Gemma Gary, that's from like Troy Books out of the UK.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with a lot of tradcraft stuff is it is out of these like esoteric publishing houses that are like independent. And there's one in Canada. There's a like ton of them in the UK. And then you got to pay like exchange rates and you got to pay shipping. And it does sort of add up.
I would also suggest the writings of Robin Artisan, who is also very accessible.
Yes.
And if you guys have any questions, because we've had a lot going on in the chat, like feel free to comment those questions again in the chat and I'll like highlight them if there are questions that we have about our topic or just about stuff that we talked about.
Night Endeavor just asked, are those books based on British witchcraft? Yeah, a lot of times when we're talking about traditional witchcraft, it does tend to be very European based, very UK based, because that is sort of where the term kind of originated. But technically, traditional witchcraft could be based upon the traditions of any culture. But yeah, they are more British, UK based. Skin turning. Okay, what is skin turning? Somebody fill me in.
I'm thinking of something that I don't know if that's what they're referring to.
Okay, Dylan, put it in the comments what you're talking about.
Like, are we talking about like epidermal like dancers?
Are we talking about pelt pedestrians?
Yeah, those that shall not be named. We don't say the words.
There's a cryptid that if you're a bit superstitious, saying its name is not exactly the best idea. Its initials are SW though.
Like skin and then.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Uh-huh. Oh, skin. Okay, this from the Devil's Dozen. This is from the Devil's Dozen. Let me pull it up.
I've literally read that book 3 times, and I'm like, "What are you talking about? Freaking ADHD! I swear to God."
Yeah, I did. I've read that book too, and I completely forgot about that.
No, and it's not ringing a bell either. So now I just look stupid. Sorry, I'm gonna let my dog out. Give me a second.
My head just went straight to cryptids. So
yeah, we like cryptids here.
Oh, it is 29 degrees here and I'm dying. That's like 84 for you American people. It's not supposed to be that hot in Canada. Page 117.
Yeah, we're actually on the cooler side today here in the Midwest. It's where Jasmine and I live, it's 69 degrees.
Oh. Yeah, we don't hit temperatures like this typically till the last 2 weeks of July, first 2 weeks of August. It's fucking May. We've got wildfires everywhere. It's insane. I'm just like, I don't know. This summer is going to be.
It's like shape shifting, right? And like the devil's different forms and like animals. Covens might perform dances of ritual skin turning, such as taking on the form of a hare to be pursued by the devil in the form of a hound.
Okay, yeah. So
it's kind of like shape shifting, flying out to the Sabbath.
Yeah, that's real similar to the fetch. Yeah, going forth as
sounds way cooler when you call it skin turning, though.
Yeah, I like skin turning.
It does.
Yeah, I'll give you that, Dylan. Yeah, that's definitely a good term for it. Thanks, Abby.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. As an ADHD witch myself, retaining information is hard.
Oh, and I just had my glasses. It turns out I was totally blind, and that's part of why I've been having such a hard time reading, because my brain is working so hard just to be able to read what's on the frickin' page.
The wildfires in Canada are running.
Oh yeah, there's like been evacuation. Like I
Good.
live in the city, so I'm fine. But like in the outlying areas around our city, there have been like emergency evacuations. I was going to do a guided meditation for Beltane on May 1st. And I laid down on my bed and I'm like, you do all the calming exercises and I'm just like jiving. And all of a sudden my phone goes,
well, I will say that here on Beltane, we had like freezing rain and it was like super frigid and cold. Like it was very not frolicking, practicing good old hedonism out in the woods weather.
It was not jumping over bonfires and going and sowing the seeds in the field, if you know what we're saying.
Ma'am.
We did like jumping the bonfire here, and like 2 days later there was like a fire ban. It's still in effect.
So Trish says, my traditional witchcraft comes from my ancestral traditions and my own family traditions. And then there are things that just come from myself.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
Yeah, that's really what traditional witchcraft is, right? It's based on traditions.
Yeah, like a chunk of my tradition also revolves around hoodoo and conjure. I was raised by my great-grandmother and my mom. My great-grandmother taught me a lot of hoodoo and conjure. She came from the South. She was a Black woman that came from the South, and she taught me a lot of that magic. So that's a big part of my tradition as well. I don't talk about that part of my tradition very much, just because despite the fact that I am mixed, you can't really tell. She's kind of pale. But, I was taught a lot of that by my grandmother.
Yeah. I wish I had family that taught me this stuff. And the funny thing is my kids, so not interested. My 24-year-old daughter is just like, yeah, Mom, whatever, just do your thing.
Yeah, my son doesn't care either. But my son is also 8, so...
And she's like, no. And then my son is like, he's 13. He just could, like, no. Could not care less.
Yeah, my son's like, I don't care. I'm going to play Minecraft, but you do witch things.
That's all he does. And now that's all I do is we sit and we play Minecraft together because that's our way of bonding. I built a witch hut in Minecraft.
I was going to say there is magic to be done in Minecraft.
I've not played any Minecraft. I need to learn about this sorcery.
When I learn about portals to the other world, whenever I go, they always look like Minecraft portals to the Nether.
See, that's a great visualization thing. Also, for those of you who don't know, Jasmine is also a video game nerd. She hides it well, but she plays World of Warcraft.
I do. And I play a holy priest.
Awesome. She's the worst.
I play a holy priest. I was literally like gagging, and some of the guild might even be like, sometimes they watch my content. So if you hear me say this from like the dagger spine realm, no, you didn't. But like, I'm actually kind of bad at the game. And like most of what I'm able to do is because I get carried through a lot of like mythic level raids. So I just get the good gear by just kind of being dragged along through the raid. And I throw like lots of golden glitter around and do heals and be cute and like change my transmog and my outfit multiple times during the raid. And that's,
What's really funny about it all is I play every once in a while. I'll play WoW, and Jasmine will be like, let's go do a raid. And she'll drag me into the hardest raid ever. And then you can tell when Jasmine is panicking because she starts jumping everywhere. And then inevitably she will jump into something and die.
Yeah.
Minecraft. And she's supposed to be one of the healers in this raid. And that's an important job.
Yes.
She's correct.
Yeah,
you can get a long way with a little bit of charm.
You can.
And flattery.
And being a blood elf.
That helps.
Do we have any more questions in the comment section?
You can decorate an altar in Minecraft.
You can.
That sounds fun.
I just put a big anvil. I have an anvil in my witch hut. Yeah, that's all I watch on YouTube is Minecraft videos. I don't even watch witchcraft videos anymore. I just watch Minecraft videos.
Sometimes I find it hard to watch some witchcraft videos because some people can be real dry.
Yeah.
You know?
But and a lot of people aren't. And they
Yeah.
make really good content. And when I actually sit down and watch it, I'm like, oh, that was so good. But when I see it pop up in my feed, I'm not like, oh my gosh, more like witchcraft, I need to watch that. I'm like, oh, because I can't just zone out to it, but I can zone out to Minecraft, to people playing Minecraft.
The only person I can like sit and zone out to, but still retain all of their information, there's two of them. One of them is Molly Roberts, the art witch.
Love her.
Love her.
I love her so much. I just joined her Patreon. I'm so excited. And then Kellyanne Maddox.
Love.
If you guys want to watch some excellent content creators who are witches, who have wonderful, inspirational, beautiful things to say about magic and their craft, and can really help you like get a good handle on your own craft, please check out Molly Roberts and Kellyanne Maddox. They are amazing witches.
If your question's not on topic, that's fine. I mean, we're not going to like enforce. We're not going to go around the chat and like enforce that everyone stay on topic.
Yeah, you can absolutely be off topic. Absolutely.
And thank you so much, Soul. Nicole says, what are your favorite witchcraft books, both for practice and as fiction? Fiction, It would be Slewfoot for me.
I have to
that right now. It's so good.
Every time I mention this,
Slewfoot is so good.
I'm halfway through it. It's so good.
So good.
I would also recommend the book that I am listening to on Audible right now, which is the very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. It is an excellent story. It's inclusive. It's a little queer. The main character is she's British, but she's Indian. And there's a lot of conversation about various races and things like that. It's a lovely book. Practical books.
The Glam Witch, The Greater Lilithian Arcane Mysteries, favorite of mine. Also Crooked Path, we'll say that again. The Devil's Dozen, Roger J. Horn. Of Blood and Bones. I think that's a really great book. The Witch's Key to the Legion. I think that's a chef's kiss, phenomenal book. I'm looking at my bookshelf here.
I'm just like anything by Keldon, by Laura Tempest Zakharoff, by Gemma Gary, by Nigel Pearson, by Peter Patton,
Jason Miller.
Yeah, anything by Jason Miller. He is one of my favorites.
Did he write Consorting with Spirits? That's the one I'm reading right now.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah,
so
Jason
good.
Miller. Now, Jason Miller isn't specifically witchcraft. He's very much sorcery and verging into ceremonial magic, but he is excellent. Also, anything by Aidan Wachter.
I was just going to say Aidan Wachter. Yeah, thank you, Dylan. Yeah, Aidan Wachter.
6 Ways, Weaving Fate, and Changeling are the books by Aidan Wachter. Amazing books.
How about, I've had this question for years, how do you separate trad, knowledge into tiers? I'm not really sure like what you mean by this question, if you're talking about like degrees of initiation, maybe like first, second, third degree. Like I think that some
beginner, intermediate, advanced. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Clarify, Dylan.
I'm also not 100% sure I can answer that.
Yeah. Assuming it's beginner, intermediate, advanced, because I know a lot of people are like, where are the advanced books in witchcraft? And I think the difference is when you're a beginner, you're reading books. When you're intermediate, you're reading books and you're starting to integrate some of it into your practice. And when you're advanced, you're doing what the books are talking about. So that like there isn't really beginner and advanced books, so to speak. It's more like what you're doing with the information. Like, I'll read a book that I've read 3 times and have something totally new pop out at me that I never picked up the first 3 times I read it.
Who are some of your favorite witchy YouTubers? Well, obviously Taya Kennedy, one of our fan favorites. That's why we have her here.
Jasmine Ambrosia. What? It's a coincidence.
Yeah.
Keldon, absolutely.
Keldon. Laura Tempest Zakharoff.
Yeah. Again,
Lorelei Black.
Lorelei Black. Again, Molly Roberts and Kellyanne Maddox, amazing witchy YouTubers.
Mm-hmm.
I find The Witch of Wonderlust very relaxing.
Oh,
Like beautiful
Olivia.
aesthetic shots,
I
very
love Olivia.
relaxing. Definitely a witch I can put on kind of like in the background and like kind of tune in and out just because like it's such like a relaxing lo-fi vibe a lot of the time.
Foolish Fish. They do he does esoteric book reviews. But does it's like a Saturday, magical Saturday, and he talks about like different like workings and stuff, like it like explains metaphysics, explains Kabbalah, explains things in like ways that make it make so much sense. You're like, oh, that really is cool. Excellent channel for like esoteric knowledge.
I don't know if they have a YouTube channel. Actually, I think they do have a YouTube channel, but The Witch of Southern Light is also really good. He's lovely.
The
Did
Red Text.
Did we say
The
Witch
Red
of Enchantment?
Text. The Witch of Enchantment.
Witch of Enchantment.
Justin is awesome.
The Red Text, they have like a YouTube channel, but I think that they primarily do a lot of podcasting. They're great.
So many good
Beanbag Hagwag, Abby the Witch, The Polish Witch, The Bougie Mystic. Everybody. Yeah, I think like Witchy YouTube is definitely going to, you know, we're creating this like digital archive of like witchy diary entries almost, you know? Like that's just cool, I think.
Oh, Blood, Sweat, and Tears said the intermediate and advanced books are not specifically pagan. They are topic specific, but usually more academic. Yes.
Also, yes. Blood, Sweat, and Steel, like the metallurgy over there, chef's kiss. They take commissions too. And yeah, I think in terms of like advanced and intermediate sort of like practice, I think the reason why we don't see as many of those books is because oftentimes a lot of it, I think, is individual practitioners UPG. And I think that there's like a lot of controversy around like sharing of UPG.
Well, and I think the other thing is Witchcraft 101 is what sells.
Yeah.
Like, it is. And the weird thing is that so many people who do the Witchcraft 101 thing, they don't talk about proper foundational practices though. Is the thing I find strange. So many people are like, let me tell you how to be a witch, but they're not telling you what foundational practices are.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the more like quote unquote advanced witchcraft books are through those like esoteric independent publishers that so many of us just don't really have a lot of access to, which is really unfortunate. But again, it's a pretty niche market. Like, let's be honest, how many people are buying books like that, right?
Right. I mean, I will speak from like just witchy, occult, metaphysical shop businesses. There's also a reason why you tend to see a lot more new age. Can you guys see this like flashing? I think I don't know why that's happening with my ring light.
It's anytime you lean back a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, from a business side of things, like a lot of stores have to kind of cater a little bit more to like a new age market with like crystals and, you know, bits and odds like that, as opposed to like the occult, depending on like where they are, because like crystals and crystal jewelry is what is paying the rent of these stores, not hand dipped incense, usually not, you know, statuary that might sit on the shelf for 2 or 3 months before someone purchases it. It's really, I mean, the stores that you see that are really big and commercial are mainly jewelry stores with like witchy stuff in them.
Yeah. No, you're very much. And I think there's a lot more new people in witchcraft coming into it going, what's it about? And then leaving. Then there are, I think, people who come into it and go, this is really cool, and stay and actually do the work and become quote unquote advanced witches. So we're a very, very small market.
Definitely.
Those brand new witches are a huge market. And you're right, the new age stuff, I mean, you can dabble in a little bit of new age stuff, even if you're Christian or you're Buddhist or you're, I don't know about if if you're Muslim, I'm not sure if that would be cool. But like, I know, like, you know, in Christianity, you're allowed to play with crystals and crystal jewelry and that idea, right? It's not quite so frowned upon.
Yeah,
so again,
for sure.
A way huger market.
Stevie Scarlett asked a really good question
Yeah,
that I
this
would
is a
like to
good
answer.
question.
What would you consider an advanced practice that new witches should stay away from at the beginning? Healing. I see so many young, like new witches, like, I want to be a healer. Stop it. I do think that healing is something that some witches are very talented at, but you can mess someone up with healing magic if it's done in the wrong way. A healing spell can turn into a hex real quick. If you don't understand the circumstance or the nature behind someone's wounds, and I'm not talking about just physical wounds, I'm talking about spiritual, mental, emotional. If you don't understand the full circumstance behind those wounds or what you tampering with those things can cause, don't do healing. Healing is an advanced practice. It is something that I don't even think most witches who say that they can actually are very good at. I think that's something that most witches should wait until much later on to investigate. Focus on your own healing, yourself, your own inner healing and stuff like that, but don't worry about healing other people unless you are much further along in your practice.
And I think too, there's a lot of like scare factor out there that like, oh my gosh, like don't you're new, you shouldn't dabble, blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, but what's gonna happen if you're new is you're probably not gonna have the energy raise, the power to put into it. So it's just gonna flop. It's not like you're gonna
Yeah.
accidentally open some portal to hell. And I agree with you with messing with other people. Shouldn't be doing that when you're new. You shouldn't be messing with other people. Focus on yourself. But chances are you're probably not going to open a portal to the gates of hell in the middle of your bedroom and be like haunted by spirits for the rest of your life, because that takes knowledge and that takes energy and power to do stuff like that, and you don't have that when you're new.
Absolutely. One of
I
the
I would say I agree with both of you in the sense that, like, yeah, I can see maybe if you're new, maybe not doing work on other people, but I'm very much of the opinion of I think that you should just fuck around and find out. And like, there are going to be consequences theoretically. What those consequences are, maybe you can interpret via divination and figure your way out. But like, I think that one of the best things for new witches to do is go directly towards like what scares them, like going directly into the fear and going through the fear, I think is what's most
Mhm.
transformative, especially like if we're talking about religious indoctrination and trauma like that. Like, I think one of the first things that you should do is go talk to the devil yourself. If
Mhm.
you're afraid of the monster that is lurking under your bed, why don't you go meet that monster like directly?
Something I will say though, and this is a piece of advice that I like to give new witches, is if you are just starting out, don't worry about external forces like gods and things like that. Learn more about yourself. Go within. I'm not saying do shadow work. I have feelings about shadow work.
I know, right?
But what I will say is that it is important for you to understand yourself a little bit better and to understand your own energies. If you want to construct an altar, fine, but construct an altar to yourself. Put symbols that resonate with you on that altar. Learn to stand in your own power before you go seeking power from without. And then once you have a little bit better of an understanding of yourself, that's when you should venture forth and maybe bring more stuff in, you know?
I just need to take a moment here and say, hi, Jody! That's my friend. She just texted me and I told a little story about her earlier. And she's like, oh my gosh, you were talking about me on YouTube.
Hi, Jody.
Hi, Jody.
Hi, Jody.
Well, like, so we're nearing the hour and a half mark, right? So we should probably start kind of wrapping this up. But in closing, if it's all right with you all, that we kind of start winding it down. In closing, like going back to the original topic of traditions and like neo traditions, do either of you have anything that you would like to kind of add on to that topic, expand upon, or like offer any bits of like wisdom or advice coming from someone from a tradition, coming from a solitary witch? Like, what would you tell somebody if you were to give them any bits of wisdom?
You know what? Before you get yourself tangled up in a tradition, just be a witch for a while. Play with it, have fun with it, figure out what you love about it, what is important to you in a practice, what works for you before you jump headlong into some crazy tradition. I know we all sort of want to learn and I want the structure and I want like somebody to teach blah 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 blah. But like I really do feel like you said earlier, Estradia, it's you need to get to know yourself and your own traumas and your own reactions and your own energetics. And there's a lot there to work with when you're getting started. And there's a lot of self-exploration that has to happen. And I'll tell you right now, like the tradition I'm in right now, I never would have resonated like I do now if I would have started that like 10 years ago. I don't know that I really would have gotten as much out of it as I do after I've like really kind of worked the program myself and figured out my own shit. And now I've got a framework that I can start to hang some of it on with this tradition. Just speaking of traditions.
Wow, that was really good, Taya. I agree with everything that you said. Just to kind of re-elaborate on what we talked about earlier, observe tradition, but your traditions don't have to be the traditions of old. Your traditions don't have to be Gretel Wooden Legs traditions. Those are Gretel's.
They never will be.
They never will be. But shout out to Gretel Wooden Leg and Hilda Swamp Tits.
Like, so conjuring them next time I'm doing spirit work.
Please.
Honestly, we need them on novenas.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah, I don't know. I think from like a neo-traditional standpoint, I think that if, I feel like the modern witchcraft world could really benefit a lot by more people, taking that space and taking that mantle and holding space. And I think that if you start creating those spaces, people will start to fill those spaces. And if, you're hesitant or you're worried about like, oh, well, who am I to be doing this or that? I think that you should just go right ahead and just do it. And if it's meant to be, then I think things will start to develop. And that
next time.
I think things will just start to develop in that. And if you start doing it to where, you use, a lot of us are hosting things in our own homes. It's a very personal and private thing too. And if you start having, just people come to your house where you start like honoring full moon rituals or whatever, or by a book club, there's a ton of groups that form just from book clubs. Engaging with your local community and creating a specific space for the community to occupy will eventually turn into something if that is meant to be. I think. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, maybe one day I would like to create my own like neo-trad, I think that you should just go right ahead and do it. So this is your permission you need to just go right ahead and just do that if that's what you feel called to. And if it's meant to work and if the spirits favor it, then I think that it will be. And if not, then it won't. There's plenty of other people who have, been part of traditions, even here in our local area, who have just piggybacked off of what other people have done, and those traditions are no longer living. So I think that there's no reason why anyone can't start their own club, start their own group, which could turn into a coven. So.
I see a lot of people asking me to elaborate on my views of shadow work. I would love to do that. However, that could be an entire video in and of itself. What I will say is that, and I feel like Abby touched on this a minute ago. I think people get confused about the nature of shadow work. And I think people go about doing it in a very unhealthy way. Something that people need to remember is that shadow work was a philosophy that was created by Carl Jung. This was a technique for therapy, and this was meant to be something that is done with a therapist. And that's not me saying that shadow work or a version of shadow work or self-introspection can't be done alone, but it is a form of path working that is meant to be done with someone who is qualified to do that kind of work.
And it's hard.
It's very hard.
And it's not something that you're doing in a weekend and being done with. Most people,
when they're doing shadow work, aren't getting the results out of it that really are what it's about. It's just like a little ego stroke. Like, oh, look, yay, I don't really have any issues. And it's like, no, everybody does. And you're right, get a therapist.
Yeah, it's great to give form and name to your shadow. It's great to have conversation with your shadow and work on that. But please keep in mind that shadow work, again, is a therapeutic technique that was developed by Carl Jung, and it was meant to be undertaken with a licensed therapist. So are you going to solve all of your trauma through shadow work? No. Will doing personal shadow work help you in some ways? Absolutely. But again, like it was said, this is not something that will be done in a night or a weekend, a week. This is something that you will have to do continuously for a lifetime. And if you have more deep-seated trauma, please don't be afraid to see a therapist and find the kind of help that will really be beneficial to you. So that's what I mean mostly. I could go deeper into that, but we don't have time for that right now. But maybe I'll make a video myself about the subject.
We're all waiting, babes. We're waiting. We're waiting for the channel drops.
And I want some of your like pop culture magic videos too.
Please.
Please.
And
that
people
would
are
be
wanting
really...
like little backstories now on our Greta and Hilda. We need an AI to write the story. So, okay, we are going to wrap this up, you guys. Thank you again, Taya, for coming on and being such a lovely guest as usual. It's always good to talk to you. It's always good to have you here on Daughters of Cain.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, you guys. That was a good conversation. I always love coming on here. You guys are awesome.
We love having you.
And thank you everybody in chat who, participated. It was good to see some familiar faces. It was really cool to see some usernames I hadn't seen before. I love that StreamYard lets us like multi-stream now from like different creators' platforms. I think that that's super cool. So yeah, thanks again. And thank you for my lovely co-pilot here on this stream, Australia. You're great. And yeah, until next time, blessed be, and we will see you in hell.
See you in hell. Love ya.